Today on the John Ankerberg Show, you will meet an amazing American family that while running their business were informed of new government health insurance laws that would force them to go against their religious convictions. When they refused to comply, the government threatened to penalize their company $1.3 million a day. Today, you will hear how their family met together and faced the fact that if they went up against the government in the courts, they had a good chance of losing their entire company of 750 stores. But they decided to stand true to their religious convictions and eventually went on to win a landmark victory at the Supreme Court. You will also learn the reason for their great generosity. For years, their family has given away 50% of all the profits the Hobby Lobby stores have made each year to Christian ministries. And finally, you'll hear about their dream to build a museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., to remind the world of the tremendous impact the Bible has made on America and on the world. This important museum will open November 17th. My guests are Steve Green, president of the 750 Hobby Lobby stores in 47 states, and also chairman of the Museum of the Bible. Second is his wife Jackie, who is co-founder of the museum and for 6 years has worked with the development team of the museum. And third is Carrie Summers, president of the Museum of the Bible. Join us for this special edition of the John Ankerberg Show. Welcome to our program. I'm John Ankerberg. Thanks for joining me. I have three special guests that you've just heard. First is Steve Green, president of the Hobby Lobby stores and chairman of the Museum of the Bible. Second is his wife, Jackie, who is co-founder of the museum. And third is Carrie Summers, president of the Museum of the Bible. Folks, I'm glad that you're here today. And Steve, I want to start with you. You're building this huge new museum in Washington, D.C. It's called the Museum of the Bible. It'll open November the 17th, real soon. In a little while, we're going to show our audience the fabulous rooms and floors that you've put into this museum. But I want to start first with a little bit about your family. I heard you speak at a personal meeting in Washington, D.C., and you hooked me, okay? I thought, this is the real deal, and I want people to hear about you and Jackie and your family, all right? I want to go back to your father, David Green. He founded the Hobby Lobby stores, and I want you to tell the folks how he was greatly influenced by his mom and dad, their love for the Bible and their love for the Lord. And then I want you to tell the folks how that influenced your dad when he started Hobby Lobby stores and how that passed on down to your brothers and sisters and yourself.
Well, my father was a preacher's kid. His father was a preacher. He actually came to Christ through ministry of my grandmother. And so as my grandparents were pastoring small churches, they would move around to different churches. And Dad is one of 6 children. Ultimately, all of my aunts and uncles, there were 3 boys, 3 girls, they all wound up going into the ministry. Dad's the only one that did not. And my grandmother had a favorite line that she would often quote to her kids, and it came from a poem, and it was that there only one life soon will pass, only what's done for Christ will last. And so that passion for God and sharing the love of God with people was passed on to the family. To the point where, as I said, they all went into the ministry except for my father. And my grandmother didn't even fully understand how that God would be able to use my father in the business world.
Right.
So as he was in the retail business, he would mention to my grandmother, I've gotten a promotion. I'm the youngest that's ever gotten this position. And my grandmother's comment, as I'm told, would be, that's great, David, but what are you doing for God in His kingdom? And so there's quite a long period of time where I think my father felt somewhat like the black sheep. Am I not good enough? Because he knew that he wasn't called into the pastoral type of a ministry. But did wind up opening his own retail store and has been able to be used by God, I think, in a mighty way.
Yes, talk about that small beginning way back when. How did he found the Hobby Lobby stores? Where did it all begin?
He was working in retail when he had the idea of starting a manufacturing of mini frames. There was a fashion design trend at the time. So he and my mother borrowed $600 to buy a chopper and some molding to start manufacturing some mini frames. It was done out of a partner's garage to begin with, and that was in 1970. And then in 1972, they rented a 600 square foot space. In the back 300 square foot is where they put the manufacturing operation, and in the front 300 square foot space is where he opened up a small retail store, and he called it Hobby Lobby. So that was the beginning of the retail. I remember my mother going down there working at no cost while my dad was still working at his day job. And then it wasn't until 1975 when he quit his retail day job to spend full time at this new startup retail called
And
Hobby
I love
Lobby.
the salary that he paid you and your brother. What was it?
So me and my brother, 7 and 9-year-old, when this got started, they'd bring sacks of molding home, and we would earn 7 cents a frame to glue frames together. We had vices in the molding and glue them together, and that's how we earned our bubble gum money. So.
Steve, the number of Hobby Lobby stores grew rather fast. How many stores does Hobby Lobby have? How many states are you operating in? And how many employees do you have?
We are in 47 of the 48 contiguous states. We have over 750 stores today. We're opening 50 to 51 stores this year, so that changes weekly, but we're up over 750 stores. We're looking in the 48 contiguous states. We're not looking at Alaska or Hawaii, and have really determined that we could put about 1,400 stores in the U.S. We've identified every location. And so that is what our goal is to get up to roughly 1,400. And today we have over 30,000 employees that we have on our payroll today. And again, that changes every month as we open new stores.
Yeah, and you're the president of the company. But I want to go back to something that the people don't know, okay? And this is unbelievable for those that have never heard this, okay? Your dad was really influenced by his parents. Okay? Now, your grandmother just had a little bit of money because her husband was the pastor of these little churches, and they didn't have very much. But she tithed even when people gave clothes to them or food to them. She would count this up in her head, and she would tithe faithfully. And she passed this on to your dad. And along the way, when he got into business with Hobby Lobby, he thought, well, I should tithe my own salary. Then he got the idea, well, maybe I should tithe something out of the business. And so he started doing this, and tell me where this has ended up.
My grandmother obviously was very influential in my father's life, both his parents. And they did. They taught my father to tithe at an early age, as my father taught us as well. We just felt like that was a part of what we as Christians, following godly guidelines, would want to do and show our love for God. And so we personally would. That was just a given. But within the business, there was early on not a lot of profits, but my dad would from time to time make some donations, but never really calculated the tithing until later. And then as we looked at it, we were not giving the 10th. And it was about that same time that we were introduced to a ministry that we wanted to give to, and really felt challenged to up our giving so that we would be tithing as a business. The family had a ministry that was presented to them that at my church that my brother and my father were attending. And we came up with a challenge. It was kind of a 5-year challenge of giving that we would give every 6 months, give the largest gift we'd ever given, and 6 months later give twice that and add that first amount each every 6 months. And it was a big challenge. We had never given that much, and it was ramping up over a 5-year period. And Dad talks about after the meeting and after the discussion, he just kind of would chuckle that we'll never be able to do that, but let's make it a goal and see if we can do it. And we have, and our giving has ramped up starting from that point to today, where we give over half of our profits for ministry purposes. And so Dad remembers saying many times that, or hearing and even saying himself, you can't outgive God. And he just felt like God at one point said, well, have you tried? And as we tried, we found that God continues to bless to the point where half of our profits we're giving to ministry purposes.
Yeah, folks, I want you to understand what he's saying. You have over 750 Hobby Lobby stores. 50% of the profit of all of those stores is a lot of money. And they sit down as a family and they decide where that money is going to go. They give 50% of the Hobby Lobby profits, okay? But then in 2012, Steve, you realized that your business was facing a great crisis when the government made excessive demands on you via the Affordable Care Act, or simply Obamacare. Tell me what the government demanded that you do.
The demand was within the health care plan, which we might have had to make some adjustments. We were already providing a health care plan for our employees, but within the requirements that there were, of the 20 contraceptives, that 4 of those could be abortive. And those 4 were what became a problem for our family. We provided contraceptives, but to provide products that could take life became a problem for the family and led us down a path that we never thought we would be going.
Yeah, now the fact is, you knew that the government would fine you a penalty of $1.3 million a day if you didn't comply with what they were saying. And 1.3 million adds up pretty quick. That's $474 million a year, or in 3 years, it's $1,423,500,000. And all of a sudden, you're faced with a decision, and so you called a family meeting. You had your mom and dad, you had the next generation, generation 2, and then generation 3, the grandkids down below here, if you want, all the way up to 16. And you got together. What happened in that meeting?
We did. We had a meeting. My father wanted to let everybody share what their thought was on the situation that we were facing, because it was a family business and he didn't want to dictate, here's what we're going to do. He wanted to see that where the family's heart was. And so in this meeting, there was 16 or so of us at the time that was there. Everybody got to share, starting with the youngest and kind of worked their way up. And there were some honest discussions about the ramifications. The 1.3 million a day was not sustainable, and that point was brought out in this discussion. So the ramifications were clear, and in the end, we knew that we really had no option. That was, are there options? Is there a compromise that we can come up with? And in the end, determined that there wasn't, and the only option that we felt like we had was to sue the government that we loved.
Yeah. Your mom and dad both said in an interview that I watched that you stood up in that meeting and you said something, using Daniel as your illustration, that changed things or brought a conclusion to it, if you want. You pointed out there were 3 options.
I felt that there were 3 options that God had, and Daniel gave us 2 of those. The first one was Daniel was told to eat the king's meat, which violated Jewish law. And he made an appeal to the authority in the prison and asked if he could eat just bread and water. And the problem was averted. So the first scenario was the problem could be averted. Secondly, Daniel was told that he couldn't pray to his God. And he said, I can't do that. I'm going to pray to my God. And it wound up he was thrown in the lion's den. In that case, God had to show up miraculously and deliver. So those were 2 options that Daniel gave us. The problem could be averted. God could show up and deliver. But I also just felt like there was a third tool that God pulls out of his toolbox sometimes, and that is he does allow suffering. Job did lose it all. Stephen was stoned. All but one of the disciples were martyred. Jesus ultimately died on the cross. So sometimes God does allow suffering, ultimately for his good. So the idea of whether the problem was averted, whether we were delivered, or whether we had suffering, there's a confidence knowing we still have to live our lives according to the guidelines that God has given us. And that is the options that I felt like we had.
Jackie, you went into that meeting knowing that you could lose the whole company. You're taking on the U.S. government, okay? And nobody had beat them in terms of this Obamacare thing. And here you are faced with this impossible situation. How'd you feel going into this meeting?
I think initially it was dismay, and a sense of shock that we were even in this position in the first place, because we love our country. We love the freedoms that we celebrate here as Americans. And so it was quite a surprise that we were being faced with this. And then there was fear and anxiety, of course. Those were part of our emotions, fear of the unknown. And on the other hand, we had such support and just encouragement from people all over the world. People would come up to us everywhere we went and would confirm that they're just praying with us, they're standing with us, and so that gave us great encouragement, and we just kept giving it back to God every day, because ultimately it was His battle that we were in. So we just trusted in the Lord.
Yeah. Your dad wrote in his book that meeting gave him great peace, and whether you lost the company or not, you were all united as a family. You were not going to give up your religious convictions. If the government forced you and they won and you lost the company, then so be it. And that gave him peace. Take us quickly through the long, long process that led all the way up to the Supreme Court, okay?
So shortly after the family meeting in September of 2012, we actually filed suit against the government and went to the local judge in Oklahoma City, and we were denied. We're asking for an injunction, which means it's just a timeout. It's not that it's a ruling on the law. It just says that the fine isn't assessed until it can be figured out in the courts.
You'd have to pay $1.3 million a day.
Exactly. So we just wanted to say, give us a timeout. Don't charge us for this fine. And so at the local level, the judge, it was a one-person judge, denied that, and so it went to the district court in Denver. It was a 3-judge panel that was asked for an emergency injunction because the fine was getting ready to be imposed pretty quickly, and we were denied at the district court in Denver. The opportunity for one of the Supreme Court justices to make a ruling was available, and it was Justice Sotomayor that chose not to get involved and chose not to give us an injunction. So then we have an opportunity to ask for what's called an en banc hearing, the whole court in Denver. It's not often given, and
very rare.
Rare is what we understood. So we asked for the full court to hear our case. We were given that opportunity, and it was at the full court, at the district level, that we did win a 5-4 ruling that we would have the injunction.
Yeah, 165-page statement that said, no, you didn't have to pay that, and you could wait till it went up to the Supreme Court.
So it wasn't a final ruling, it was just there was a timeout, no fines would be imposed while the courts figure this out. Is it legal
and they
or not?
pulled you in real fast going toward the Supreme Court.
Exactly. And so because we were asking for this an emergency injunction, we were getting in front of the line. The line was 100 deep in suits against the government on this case, and we just happened to be in the front and wound up being chosen to be reviewed at the Supreme Court with Conestoga Wood, a company out of Pennsylvania. And ultimately, it was in June of 2014 when the Supreme Court had their ruling, and we had a 5-4 win, saying that we did not have to provide abortifacients that would violate our conscience.
Yeah, I love your dad. He says, I'm sitting in the Supreme Court, my company was on the line, I knew huge matters of faith and justice that I cared about were on the line. I also knew the Lord was watching. How'd you feel, Jackie, when you heard the final ruling?
Well, it was amazing. We really...
Joy, unbelievable joy.
Yeah, can't even express how we felt. We were amazed, we were just jubilant. We were so grateful, on the other hand, for God's, we feel like He was just with
protection.
us all the way.
Yep.
And also thankful for the support of the other people that love the Bible.
All the people that were praying. Many
Yes.
Christians across the country and the world were praying for
Everywhere.
that. Let's jump to another topic. Steve, you are building this huge museum in Washington, And I want to know, when did you get the idea to build this Museum of the Bible?
The idea was actually first brought to us by a group that had a dream of putting a Bible museum in Dallas, and they wanted to know if we would help. And I said, well, if the right opportunity came up, we would consider it. So then the opportunity to buy an artifact was presented, and I just said, well, we might be willing to buy that for this dream of a museum. And it was as the collection grew, in our first artifact we bought in 2009, and the collection grew rapidly. The economy was part of what helped that. There were opportunities that we acquired a document from Cambridge as an example because they were needing to raise some funds. And so as the collection grew, then the family just felt a sense of responsibility that we needed to make sure that this dream became a reality. And we knew that we would be able to get that out of the starting gate and get it launched. So that's really what started our journey, and it's been an amazing journey over this last 7 years to see what all God has done.
Carrie, we're going to start showing pictures of this museum next week and all the fantastic things. This is going to be just a fantastic museum, all right? Tell the folks why you expect people to come from all 50 states, people that are Christians, people from all denominations. You're going to have Jewish people, those of other religions, and even atheists are going to want to come and see this. And then we're going to invite people. There's 200 countries that are watching what you're saying right now. Why are they going to fly to the United States to see this museum in Washington?
The Bible is written for all people. It's the most read book of all time, the best-selling book of all time. It's also the most banned book of all time, the most destroyed book of all time. It has influenced governments from the day it was ever printed, and oral tradition influenced governments, influenced people. And so we know there's a high curiosity, no matter what your faith is, in this book. And that's one reason, through all the surveys we've done, we know that people will come, for another reason, just for that.
Next week, we're going to find out how you pull this off, but I want you to tell the people where they can find this museum when they come to Washington, D.C.
Amazing story. We'll talk about it later, but it's 2 blocks from the Aerospace Museum, which is one of the 2 largest museums in the U.S., and 3 blocks from the U.S. Capitol.
Yep, right from the top floor. You can sit there and you can look and you feel like you can reach out and touch it.
That's correct.
And we're going to show them all those pictures next week. So folks, I hope that you'll join us, because this is going to be the most high-tech museum in Washington, D.C., and it's going to be all about the Bible. And wait till we tell you about it. I can't wait for you to hear this, so I hope that you'll join us next week. As we close today, let me say that I'm thankful that we have Christian businessmen like Steve Green, his father David, his brother Mart, and sister Darcy, and their families who love the Lord and have had the courage to stand for their Christian beliefs and run their huge businesses with Christian principles. And I think that we're all thankful to them for providing the unbelievable startup gift that made it possible for us to have this major museum in Washington, D.C. that honors the Bible. But now, people coming from around the world, as they step inside the museum, they're going to see a 1 million name wall listing others who say, I too honor the Bible and support this museum. And if you will give a generous gift of any amount, the museum will engrave and display your name on their 1 million name wall for all to see. To have your name permanently engraved on this wall, just go to the museumofthebible.org and look for 1 million name wall. Then please, do not forget to pray for the Christians in Russia. In just the last few weeks, the Russian government has harshly cracked down on the evangelical churches across Russia. I just talked with Hannu Hauka in Finland and asked him to describe for you what the Christian churches are experiencing right now. Listen.
The Russian government has cracked down on all of the evangelical churches with new laws and restrictive regulations that have been added to the law that was signed by President Putin last year. The government now states that any evangelical Christian church with 50 members or more is designated as a potential terrorist target. Can you imagine that, a terrorist target? And as such, they must hire and pay for government security agents to be on site and to attend every church service. That means that KGB agents will be in every church service. And they also need to add very expensive metal detectors to the entrance of their church. John, churches cannot simply afford to pay for these security measures. It's just simply a way to crush the churches financially. If the churches can't afford to comply with these new regulations, then the law says that only 50 people can come to their church. Some pastors are trying desperately to avoid these measures by removing all but 50 people from their membership rolls. For example, churches that have 400 members are now removing 350 of their members from the church rolls. But of course, Christians whose names are removed, they wonder what will happen to them. Will they be forced to gather someplace else? They would be like sheep without a shepherd. Maybe they can't even visit their church as visitors. Right now, nobody in Russia really knows what will happen. I have received an emergency request from 1,600 evangelical churches for 1 million more Power to Change books. These books were responsible for many thousands of Russian people coming to know Christ, and they want to give these books to their family and to their friends to lead them to Jesus. Right now, God has allowed these printing presses in Russia to still print these books for me, but I fear this opportunity may soon close. So I'm asking you for your help right away to provide 1 million more Power to Change books before the doors in Russia close for good.
Folks, these dear Christians in Russia are being persecuted and urgently need our help. In the last 3 weeks, you have responded in a wonderful way. And as of right now, we've received gifts to provide 372,575 Power to Change books for Russia and 100,635 books in Spanish for Cuba. However, as you just heard Hanu say, the Christians in Russia urgently need our help to provide 630,000 more Power to Change books. If you'll help, there are 5 ways you can provide the needed books and help our ministry's outreach. First, if you'll give a gift of $30, you'll provide 45 books. If you give a gift of $100, you'll provide 150 books. A gift of $500 will provide 750 books, and a gift of $1,000 will provide 1,500 books. And your gift of $5,000 will provide 7,500 books. And if you're able, your gift of $10,000 will provide 15,000 books. Hanu has received this emergency request from 1,600 evangelical Christian churches in Russia that he helped start. And they need our help now before the doors close for good. If you wish to help, please call us right now at 1-800-805-3030. That's 1-800-805-3030. And you may call that same number any day this week, 24 hours a day. Or you may go to our website at jashow.org, where we have a secure place for you to give your gift. The need is urgent, and I'll appreciate your help very much.